Bethany Kane's heart raced as she sprinted through the dusty streets of Moab, Utah territory. The hem of her wedding dress clenched in white-knuckled fists, tears blurring her vision as she fled from the small church at the edge of town. The year was 1878, and she had just committed what many would consider the ultimate social transgression, leaving a wealthy man at the altar. But what choice did she have after discovering the cruel truth about her betrothed mere moments before they were to exchange vows? The hot June sun beat down mercilessly as she ran, her elaborate updo coming undone with each desperate step, pearl hairpins scattering behind her like abandoned dreams. Bethany hadn't planned an escape route, hadn't planned to escape at all. Her lungs burned and her feet, clad in delicate satin slippers never intended for flight, were already blistering. "You can't outrun them on foot, madam," a deep voice called from her right. Bethany skidded to a stop, whirling toward the source. A tall man sat atop a magnificent chestnut stallion in the shadow of the general store. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his worn Stetson, but she could see the concerned furrow of his brow. His clothing marked him as a working cowboy: denim trousers, flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing sun-bronzed forearms, and a leather vest weathered by years on the trail. I. She stammered, words failing her as the sound of voices grew louder behind her. Her father's booming commands and her would-be husband's angry shouts echoed between the buildings. "Don't rightly know what you're running from," the cowboy said, swinging down from his saddle with fluid grace, "but you look like you need help more than explanations." He extended a calloused hand. "Name's Hayes Garrett. My friends call me Hayes." For a heartbeat, Bethany hesitated. She knew nothing about this man except that he was offering escape when she desperately needed it. Behind her, the voices grew closer. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They'll make me marry him." "I can't. I just can't." Hayes nodded once, his expression solemn. "Up you go, then." He cupped his hands to give her a boost onto his horse, then swung up behind her in one smooth motion. "Hold tight, miss. Ranger here is the fastest horse in the territory." With a gentle kick and a quiet command, the stallion leapt forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them as they thundered away from town, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Bethany clutched the saddle horn, feeling the cowboy's solid presence behind her, a stranger who had just become her unlikely savior. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the drumming of hooves and the whistling wind. "Away," Hayes replied simply. "We'll figure out the rest later." They rode hard for nearly an hour, following the Colorado River before Hayes finally guided the horse up a winding trail that led to a plateau overlooking the river valley. From this vantage point, they could see for miles in all directions, including back toward Moab. No riders followed, at least not yet. Hayes dismounted first, then reached up to help Bethany down. Her legs trembled as her feet touched solid ground and she stumbled. His strong hands steadied her, then quickly released her once she found her balance. "Thank you," she said, finally looking directly into his face. Hayes Garrett was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her 21 years. His features were striking rather than conventionally handsome. A strong jaw darkened with stubble, a straight nose that might have been broken once, and eyes the color of a summer storm. But it was the kindness in those eyes that made her breath catch. "You're welcome, miss." He let the question hang. Bethany Kane." She attempted to smooth her ruined dress, suddenly self-conscious. "I must look a fright." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I've seen worse. Though most brides I meet aren't running away from their own weddings." The reminder of her situation brought a fresh wave of tears. Hayes looked immediately contrite. "I'm sorry, Miss Kane. That was thoughtless. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a clean bandana, offering it to her. Here, and if you're of a mind to talk about it, I'm of a mind to listen. No judgments. Bethany accepted the bandana, dabbing at her tears. I was to marry Albert Richardson. His family owns the largest silver mine near Moab. She twisted the bandana between her fingers. My father arranged it. The Kane name used to mean something in these parts, but my father's investments failed and we've been living on borrowed money and borrowed time. Hayes nodded. A marriage of convenience, then. It seemed reasonable. I didn't love Albert, but he was educated from a good family. I thought perhaps affection would grow in time. She laughed bitterly. Then this morning, Albert's housekeeper came to see me. She risked her position to warn me about his proclivities. Proclivities? Hayes asked, his expression darkening. He's hurt women. Several of them. The housekeeper showed me her scars. Bethany shuddered. When I confronted my father, he already knew. He said all men have their ways and that I'd learn to manage Albert's temper. As if? She couldn't continue, choking on the betrayal. Hayes's jaw tightened. No decent man hurts a woman, Miss Kane. Your father is wrong. He looked away toward the horizon. My own father taught me that a man who raises his hand to a woman is no man at all. So I ran, Bethany concluded. In the middle of the ceremony, when the minister asked if anyone knew a reason we should not be wed, I simply fled. She glanced down at her tattered dress. I had nowhere to go, no plan, just the desperate need to escape. You did right, Hayes said firmly, but they'll be looking for you. Richardson has enough money to hire men to track you down. What am I going to do? The enormity of her situation suddenly crashed down on her. She had no money, no possessions beyond the ruined dress she wore, and nowhere to go. Her family would disown her, and Albert would never forgive the public humiliation. Hayes was silent for a long moment, contemplating the landscape. Finally, he turned to her with determination in his eyes. I'm headed north to my ranch in Colorado. It's a small spread, nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. You'd be safe there until you decide what you want to do next. He hastened to add, I've got a cabin where you could stay. You'd have your privacy and your dignity. Bethany stared at him, stunned by the offer. Why would you do that for a stranger? Hayes shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. My ma raised me to help folks in trouble, and you're in trouble, Miss Kane. Besides, he added with a small smile, Ranger seems to like you and he's a fine judge of character. The horse nickered softly as if agreeing. Despite everything, Bethany found herself smiling. How far is your ranch? 4 days' ride, give or take. We need to be careful, avoid the main trails. He gestured to her dress. And we'd need to find you something less conspicuous to wear. Bethany looked down at the once beautiful gown with its lace and pearl embellishments, now torn and dust-covered. Yes, I suppose a wedding dress does rather stand out. There's a trading post about an hour's ride from here. The woman who runs it, Mrs. Wilcox, is discreet. We could get you proper clothes there. He hesitated. If you decide to come with me, that is. Bethany considered her options, which were admittedly few. She could return to Moab and face her father's wrath and Albert's vengeance. She could try to make her way to one of the larger towns alone, with no money and no protection. Or she could trust this stranger who had already shown her more kindness than anyone had in years. I'll come with you, Mr. Garrett, she decided, but I insist on repaying you somehow. I won't be a charity case. Hayes nodded, respecting her pride. Fair enough, we'll work something out. He offered his hand to help her back onto Ranger. And please, it's just Hayes. Hayes, she repeated, taking his hand and allowing him to boost her into the saddle. This time, she was conscious of his proximity as he mounted behind her, his chest solid against her back. Ready, he asked, his breath warm against her ear. As I'll ever be, Bethany replied, facing forward and toward an uncertain future that somehow seemed less frightening with Hayes Garrett beside her. The trading post was exactly where Hayes had said it would be, a small, sturdy cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees near the river. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it Wilcox Trading Post and General Goods. Several horses were hitched outside, making Bethany nervous, but Hayes reassured her. Those are Ute ponies. The local tribe trades with Mrs. Wilcox. They won't be concerned with affairs in Moab. Still, Hayes insisted that Bethany wait with Ranger behind the store while he went in first to speak with Mrs. Wilcox. She watched him disappear inside, anxiety building with each passing minute. What if he didn't come back? What if this had all been an elaborate ruse? But her fears proved unfounded when Hayes emerged with a kind-faced older woman who wore her silver hair in a practical braid and carried herself with quiet authority. "This is Mrs. Wilcox," Hayes introduced them. "She's agreed to help." "Land's sakes, child, you do look like you've been through the wars," Mrs. Wilcox said, her keen eyes taking in Bethany's disheveled appearance. "Come inside through the back door. I've sent the customers on their way and hung the closed sign." Inside, the trading post was a marvel of organization, with shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to tools, fabric to firearms. Mrs. Wilcox led them to a small living area behind the store, where a pot of coffee bubbled on a cast-iron stove. "Hayes tells me you're in need of traveling clothes and a bit of discretion," she said, pouring coffee into 3 tin cups. "He didn't share details, and I won't pry, but I recognize a woman running from trouble when I see one." Bethany accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you for your help." "20 years ago I was in your shoes," Mrs. Wilcox said matter-of-factly. "Different circumstances, I expect, but the same desperate look. Someone helped me then. I'm just passing on the favor." While Hayes waited outside, Mrs. Wilcox helped Bethany select sturdy traveling clothes. A plain skirt and 2 blouses, undergarments, a serviceable jacket for cool evenings, and most importantly, a pair of riding boots that fit well enough with thick socks. She also provided a wide-brimmed hat and a bandana to protect Bethany's fair skin from the sun. "What do I owe you?" Bethany asked as she emerged from behind a screen, dressed in her new clothes, the wedding dress bundled up in brown paper. Mrs. Wilcox waved away the question. "Hayes settled the account, said you two had an arrangement." Bethany frowned, adding this to the debt she already owed him, but Mrs. Wilcox wasn't finished. She pressed a small bundle into Bethany's hands. "This is from me," she said. "Soap, a hairbrush, some salve for those blisters I noticed on your feet, and a few feminine necessities a woman might need on the trail." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes at this unexpected kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." "Live free," Mrs. Wilcox said simply. "That's thanks enough." Before they left, Mrs. Wilcox pulled Hayes aside for a private word. Bethany couldn't hear what was said, but she noticed the serious nod Hayes gave in response. Then they were on their way, with Ranger carrying their supplies and Bethany now riding a steady bay mare that Mrs. Wilcox had sold to Hayes at what he claimed was a fair price. "Her name's Penny," Hayes told Bethany as they rode away from the trading post. "Mrs. Wilcox says she's gentle but sure-footed, good for a beginner." Bethany stroked the mare's neck, grateful for the independence of having her own mount. "You've spent a lot of money on my behalf already." "Consider it an investment," Hayes replied. "Besides, we'll make better time with 2 horses." He glanced at the sun, which was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We should find a place to make camp soon. There's a spot I know about 2 miles ahead with good water and shelter." True to his word, Hayes led them to a small clearing near a stream, sheltered by a rocky overhang that would protect them from the elements. He efficiently set about making camp, showing Bethany how to unsaddle and brush down Penny while he gathered firewood and built a small, nearly smokeless fire. "Learned that trick from a Shoshone friend," he explained. "Makes the fire harder to spot from a distance." They ate a simple meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack that Hayes had in his provisions, supplemented with fresh biscuits Mrs. Wilcox had packed for them. As darkness fell, Bethany became increasingly aware of how alone they were, a young, unmarried woman and a man she'd known less than a day, miles from civilization. Hayes seemed to sense her discomfort. "You take the bedroll," he said, unrolling the thick blanket near the fire. "I'll keep watch for a while, then sleep with my saddle for a pillow. Been doing it for years." "That hardly seems fair," Bethany protested. "I've already imposed enough." "It's no imposition," Hayes insisted. "Besides, I promised Mrs. Wilcox I'd be a gentleman, and I mean to keep my word." Something in his tone made Bethany believe him completely. She settled onto the bedroll, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the cooling night air. "Thank you, Hayes, for everything." He tipped his hat in acknowledgement, his face half illuminated by the flickering firelight. "Get some rest, Miss Kane. We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow." "Bethany," she corrected him softly. "If I'm to call you Hayes, then you should call me Bethany." A smile tugged at his lips. "Good night, Bethany." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Bethany as she stared up at the vast canopy of stars. Her life had transformed completely in the space of a day. Yesterday, she had been Bethany Kane, dutiful daughter and bride-to-be. Today, she was a fugitive, fleeing across the wilderness with a man who was still largely a stranger, heading toward an uncertain future. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt something like freedom. The journey north proved more arduous than Bethany had anticipated. Though she'd ridden horses occasionally as a girl, she'd never spent long hours in the saddle day after day. By the evening of their second day on the trail, every muscle in her body protested, and she dismounted from Penny with a barely suppressed groan. Hayes, who had been watching her with increasing concern throughout the afternoon, approached as she tried to stretch discreetly. "Your saddle's sore," he observed. "I'll manage," Bethany insisted, though she couldn't quite hide her wince. "No need to suffer in silence." Hayes rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small tin. "Mrs. Wilcox gave me this for you. It's an ointment for sore muscles. She said you might be too proud to ask for it." Bethany accepted the tin with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Is my discomfort that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been watching you," Hayes replied, then immediately looked away as if he'd revealed too much. "I'll see to the horses and give you some privacy too. Apply that where needed." As he busied himself with the evening camp chores, Bethany retreated behind a stand of juniper trees with the ointment. The herbal-scented salve provided almost immediate relief to her chafed thighs and aching lower back. By the time she returned to the camp, Hayes had a fire going and was brewing coffee in a blackened pot. "Better?" he asked without looking up. "Much," Bethany admitted, lowering herself carefully onto a fallen log. "Thank you." Hayes nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "We should reach the Colorado border tomorrow. Once we cross it, we'll be in less familiar territory for anyone from Moab who might be following." "Do you think they are? Following us, I mean." "Hard to say. Richardson has money and influence. Depends how badly he wants to find you." Hayes poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "But we've been careful. Stuck to game trails instead of main roads. Crossed water when we could to break our trail." Bethany wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. "You seem to know a lot about avoiding pursuit." A shadow crossed Hayes's face. Let's just say I've had my share of experiences with men who don't like taking no for an answer. You're not a criminal, are you? The question slipped out before Bethany could stop it. To her relief, Hayes laughed. No, madam. I've had my run-ins with the law, but nothing serious. Mostly disagreements about property lines and water rights, the usual territorial disputes. His answer reminded Bethany how little she knew about the man she was trusting with her safety. Tell me about your ranch, she prompted. What's it like? Hayes's expression softened. It's not much compared to some. 600 acres in a valley with a year-round creek running through it. Good grazing land, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms. I run about 100 head of cattle, give or take. It sounds wonderful, Bethany said sincerely. Her experience with ranching was limited to what she'd heard, but the pride in Hayes's voice when he spoke of his land was unmistakable. Took me 8 years to save enough to buy it, he continued. Worked as a trail driver, ranch hand, sometimes a scout for the army. Lived on beans and hardtack, saved every penny. He stared into the fire. Worth every sacrifice to have something that's mine. I admire that, Bethany said quietly, having the courage to build something of your own. Hayes glanced up, meeting her eyes across the flames. What about you? What would you build if you could choose anything? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked Bethany what she wanted for herself. As a daughter in the Kane household, her purpose had always been defined by others to be an ornament to her father's status, then a solution to his financial troubles through an advantageous marriage. I don't know, she admitted. I never thought I had a choice. Everyone has choices, Hayes said. Some are just harder than others. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Later, as Bethany settled into the bedroll, she found herself contemplating Hayes's words. What would she choose if the choice were truly hers? For the first time, the future seemed full of possibilities rather than obligations. The next day brought them into Colorado territory. The landscape gradually transformed, the red rock formations giving way to rolling hills covered in sagebrush and stands of aspen and pine. They made camp early beside a clear-running stream, and Hayes announced they could risk a larger fire tonight. We'll have fresh fish for supper, he declared, producing a length of fishing line and a hook from his seemingly inexhaustible saddlebags. While Hayes fished, Bethany washed their few utensils and her spare clothing in the stream, hanging the latter on low branches to dry in the late afternoon sun. The domestic routine felt strangely comfortable, a temporary semblance of normalcy in their uncertain journey. Here's a beauty, Hayes called, holding up a good-sized trout. Enough for both of us with some to spare. He showed Bethany how to clean the fish, his hands deft and sure as he demonstrated the process. My father taught me to fish when I was barely tall enough to hold the rod, he explained. Said a man who could catch his own dinner would never truly starve. Your father sounds like a wise man, Bethany observed, carefully mimicking his technique on a second, smaller fish. He was, Hayes agreed, a wistfulness entering his voice. Died 5 years ago. Pneumonia took him after a particularly harsh winter. I'm sorry, Bethany said, genuinely sympathetic. My mother passed when I was 14, consumption. Their shared experiences of loss created a new bond between them, and as they prepared and ate their meal, their conversation flowed more easily than before. Hayes told stories of his childhood on his father's small farm in Missouri, of learning to ride almost before he could walk, and of his decision to head west after his father's death, seeking opportunity and open spaces. In turn, Bethany shared memories of her mother, a gentle woman who had taught her to read and appreciate beauty in small things, and of the gradual decline of her family's fortunes after her mother's death, when her father turned to increasingly desperate financial gambles. "He wasn't always as he is now," Bethany said, staring into the flames. "I remember when he used to laugh, when he would bring my mother wildflowers and read poetry aloud in the evenings." "Grief changes people," Hayes observed. "Some harden, some break. Sounds like your father hardened." "Yes," Bethany agreed sadly. "Until he could sell his only daughter without a second thought." Hayes's expression darkened. "No man has the right to sell another human being, daughter or not." "In society's eyes, he had every right," Bethany pointed out. "A father's authority over his daughter is absolute until she marries. Then it transfers to her husband." "The law may say that," Hayes acknowledged, "but there's a higher law that says each person owns themselves. No piece of paper can change that." His conviction stirred something in Bethany, a sense that perhaps her instinctive flight from the altar hadn't been merely fear or rebellion, but a fundamental assertion of her right to determine her own fate. As night deepened around them, Bethany found herself studying Hayes covertly in the firelight. Over the past 3 days, she had come to appreciate not just his kindness but his competence, his quiet strength, and the principles that guided him. He was unlike any man she had known in Moab's society circles, direct where they were circuitous, genuine where they were calculating. And she had to admit, there was something undeniably appealing about his physical presence as well. The way he moved with unconscious grace, the breadth of his shoulders, the rare but transformative smile that lit his storm-gray eyes. Catching herself in these thoughts, Bethany quickly looked away. It was foolish to develop an attachment to Hayes Garrett. He had offered her sanctuary, not courtship. Once they reached his ranch, she would need to determine her next steps, perhaps finding work in a nearby town, or making her way to Denver, where she might disappear into the anonymity of a larger city. But as she settled into her bedroll that night, listening to Hayes's steady breathing from the other side of the dying fire, she couldn't help wondering what it might be like to belong somewhere again, to belong with someone who valued her freedom as much as his own. The 4th day of their journey brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as they broke camp, and a cool wind carried the unmistakable scent of rain. "Looks like we're in for a soaking," Hayes observed, eyeing the sky with concern. "We should try to make it to shelter before the worst hits. My friend Jacob has a line cabin about 15 miles from here. He won't mind if we use it." They rode at a faster pace than previous days, Bethany now comfortable enough in the saddle to manage Penny at a steady trot. The first raindrops began to fall around midday, light at first but gradually increasing in intensity. Hayes pulled a slicker from his saddlebag and insisted Bethany wear it, despite her protests that he would be soaked. "I'm used to weather," he said firmly. "Besides, my shirt will dry faster than your blouse and jacket." By the time they reached the line cabin, a simple one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs, the rain had become a downpour, and both riders were thoroughly drenched despite Hayes's slicker. The cabin was basic but sound, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough table with one chair, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "Not exactly the Palmer House Hotel," Hayes apologized as they brought in their saddlebags and Hayes's bedroll, leaving the saddles on the small covered porch. "It's perfect," Bethany assured him, relieved to be out of the rain. "Absolutely perfect." Hayes built a fire in the fireplace while Bethany took inventory of the cabin's supplies. They found coffee, beans, flour, salt, and even a can of peaches that Hayes declared would be a welcome treat after their simple trail meals. The real challenge presented itself after they had shed their wet outer garments. Even with the fire blazing, They were both shivering in their damp clothes. "You need to get into something dry," Hayes said, pointedly looking at the wall rather than at Bethany, whose blouse was clinging to her in a way that made both of them acutely uncomfortable. "I'll step outside while you change." "You'll catch your death," Bethany protested. The rain was still falling heavily, and thunder rumbled in the distance. "I can change behind the blanket if you hang it across the corner." It was a practical solution, but implementing it required a level of intimate cooperation that tested their carefully maintained propriety. Hayes held the blanket while Bethany secured it to create a small changing area, their fingers brushing briefly in the process. The simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through Bethany, and from Hayes's sudden intake of breath, she suspected he felt it too. Once the makeshift screen was in place, Bethany changed quickly into her dry clothes, acutely aware of Hayes's presence on the other side of the thin blanket. When it was his turn, she sat at the table with her back deliberately turned, trying not to envision him removing his sodden shirt and trousers. The rain continued throughout the afternoon and into the evening, drumming on the cabin's wooden roof and turning the ground outside into a muddy morass. They prepared a simple meal together in the small space, moving around each other with careful awareness, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. Each accidental touch seemed to charge the air between them. After they had eaten, they sat in companionable silence before the fire, Hayes on the floor with his back against the wall, Bethany on the cabin's only chair. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the eaves and rattling the single window. "We won't be traveling tomorrow if this keeps up," Hayes observed. "The creek we need to cross will be flooded." Bethany nodded, uncertain whether to be dismayed or relieved at the prospect of another day in such close quarters. The cabin, while dry and secure, seemed to be shrinking by the hour, the air between them increasingly laden with unspoken awareness. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured after a moment. Hayes looked up, firelight playing across his features. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." Bethany gathered her courage. "Have you ever been married, or close to it?" A shadow crossed his face. "Once. Her name was Sarah. We were engaged to be married 5 years ago." "What happened?" Bethany asked softly. Hayes stared into the flames. "Influenza swept through the town where she lived. She was caring for sick children at the school where she taught. She fell ill herself and was gone within a week." His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "I was driving cattle to market. By the time I got the news and returned, she was already buried." "I'm so sorry," Bethany whispered, understanding now the fleeting sadness she had sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. Hayes nodded in acknowledgement. "After that, I threw myself into building the ranch. Figured I'd had my chance at happiness and missed it. And now—" the question slipped out before Bethany could reconsider its presumption. Hayes looked directly at her then, his gaze steady and searching. "Now I'm not so sure. Maybe life gives second chances if you're brave enough to take them." The weight of his words hung between them, full of possibility. Outside, a particularly loud thunderclap broke the moment, making Bethany jump. Hayes smiled gently. "You should take the cot," he said, changing the subject. "I'll be fine here by the fire." "You've slept on the ground for 3 nights because of me," Bethany protested. "At least take turns." "I'm not putting a lady on the floor while I take the bed," Hayes said with finality. "My mother would rise from her grave and tan my hide." Bethany couldn't help laughing at his expression of mock horror. "Your mother sounds formidable." "She was," Hayes agreed, a genuine smile lighting his features. "And she'd like you. She always said character shows clearest in times of trouble." The simple compliment warmed Bethany more than the fire. "Thank you," she said softly. "Your mother raised a good son." Hayes looked away, seeming almost embarrassed by her praise. "Get some rest, Bethany. Storm or not, we still have a long ride ahead when the weather clears." Bethany settled onto the narrow cot, pulling a rough woolen blanket over herself. Despite the hard mattress and the continuing storm outside, she felt safer than she had in years. As she drifted toward sleep, her last conscious awareness was of Hayes adding wood to the fire, his profile etched against the flames, keeping watch while she slept. The storm raged throughout the night and continued into the following day, confirming Hayes's prediction that they would be unable to travel. They spent the day in domestic harmony, making the most of the cabin's limited supplies. Hayes repaired a loose shutter while Bethany discovered a small store of dried herbs hanging from the rafters and used them to improve their meals. By the second night, the close quarters had created an intimacy between them that transcended physical proximity. They shared stories of their lives, discovered shared interests in books they had read, and talked about their hopes for the future. "I always wanted to learn to paint," Bethany confessed as they sat before the fire, nursing cups of coffee. "My mother was quite talented with watercolors. She started teaching me, but after she died, my father considered it a frivolous pursuit." "Nothing that brings beauty into the world is frivolous," Hayes replied. "My ranch house has empty walls that could use some color." The casual comment, implying she might still be at his ranch long enough to paint pictures for its walls, hung between them, neither acknowledging its significance. On the morning of the third day, they awoke to silence. The storm had finally passed. Outside, the world was washed clean, the air crisp and scented with pine. Puddles glittered in the early sunlight and birds called from the trees surrounding the cabin. "Creek will still be high," Hayes said after they had breakfast, "but we should be able to cross by midday if we're careful. We can reach my ranch by tomorrow evening if we make good time." The prospect of reaching their destination, which had seemed a distant goal just days ago, now filled Bethany with conflicting emotions. Safety and stability beckoned, but so did the end of this journey that had brought her closer to Hayes with each passing day. They packed their few belongings efficiently, working together with the rhythm they had developed during their travels. As Bethany swept the cabin floor one last time, Hayes stepped outside to saddle the horses. When she joined him a few minutes later, she found him standing motionless, staring down the muddy trail that led away from the cabin. "Hayes," she called, concerned by his rigid posture. He turned to her, his expression grim. Riders coming, 3 of them moving fast. Fear clutched at Bethany's heart. "Albert's men, can't be sure, but we're not waiting to find out." Hayes moved with swift efficiency, securing their bags to the saddles. "We'll head west through the trees, then double back north once we're out of sight. It'll add time to our journey, but it's safer." They mounted quickly and rode away from the cabin at a brisk pace, keeping to the tree line to minimize their visibility. Hayes led them on a winding path through thick stands of pine and across shallow streams, constantly alert for sounds of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, when they had heard nothing to indicate they were being followed, Hayes finally allowed them to stop briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal from their supplies. "You think we lost them?" Bethany asked, scanning the forest nervously. "Maybe," Hayes said, though his cautious tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Or maybe they weren't looking for us at all, but I'd rather be overcautious than careless." They continued their journey as the day waned, now traveling more directly northward but still avoiding open ground when possible. Hayes seemed to know the country well, navigating confidently despite the detour from their planned route. As dusk approached, he led them to a small clearing beside a tumbling stream. "We'll camp here tonight," he decided. We're about 20 miles from my ranch as the crow flies, but the terrain is rough. Better to rest the horses and start fresh in the morning." The evening routine of making camp had become familiar to Bethany, and she worked alongside Hayes with practiced ease, gathering firewood while he saw to the horses, then helping to prepare their simple meal. But there was a new tension between them tonight, an awareness that their time together was drawing to a close. After they had eaten, Hayes sat cleaning his rifle while Bethany mended a small tear in her skirt. The silence between them weighted with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Hayes set aside his rifle and cleared his throat. "Bethany," he began, uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice, "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach my ranch." She looked up from her sewing, her heart suddenly racing. "Oh, I meant what I said about you being welcome to stay as long as you need," he continued. "There's a small cabin near the main house. It was built for the previous owner's mother. It's simple but comfortable. You'd have your privacy." "That's very generous," Bethany said carefully. Hayes nodded, then seemed to gather his resolve. "The thing is, I've gotten used to having you around these past days. More than used to it. I've come to value your company." Bethany set aside her mending, acutely aware of the significance of this conversation. "I've valued yours as well, Hayes. What I'm trying to say not very well, I'm afraid, is that I'd like you to consider staying, not just temporarily, but permanently." He met her eyes directly. "I know we've only known each other a short time. I know you've just escaped one unwanted match, and the last thing you need is another man presuming on your future. But I hope, there's something between us worth exploring." Bethany's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the growing connection between them, had even allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to build a life with Hayes Garrett. But hearing him voice those possibilities made them suddenly, thrillingly real. "I don't have much to offer beyond my ranch and my good name," Hayes continued when she didn't immediately respond. "But I can promise you this. I would never try to own you or control you. You'd be free to pursue your painting or anything else that brings you joy. And I would spend every day trying to be worthy of your choice if you chose to stay." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming emotion. "Hayes!" A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp, instantly silencing their conversation. Hayes was on his feet in a fluid motion, rifle in hand, positioning himself between Bethany and the potential threat. "Come out where I can see you," he called, his voice hard. "I've got a rifle trained on your position." There was a moment of tense silence, then a figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised in a gesture of peace. In the flickering firelight, Bethany could make out a man wearing a badge on his vest. "No need for the rifle, friend," the newcomer said. "I'm Sheriff Daniel Wilson from Grand Junction." "Just want to talk." Hayes didn't lower his weapon. "Talk about what?" The sheriff's gaze shifted to Bethany. "I'm looking for a Miss Bethany Kane. Understood she might be traveling in these parts." Bethany's blood ran cold. "How did you find us?" "Wasn't hard," the sheriff replied. "Got a telegram 3 days ago about a runaway bride and a cowboy headed north. When you stayed at Jacob Miller's line cabin during the storm, a hunting party spotted your horses. Word gets around." Hayes finally lowered his rifle, though his posture remained vigilant. "What exactly do you want with Miss Kane?" "Nothing personal," Sheriff Wilson assured them, stepping closer to the fire. "Just passing along a message. Her father wants her to know that if she returns to Moab immediately, all will be forgiven. The wedding can be rescheduled, no questions asked." "And if I don't return?" Bethany asked, finding her voice despite her fear. The sheriff hesitated. "Then Mr. Richardson intends to press charges for theft. Claims you took family jewelry that was a conditional gift, meant to be worn by his wife." "That's absurd," Bethany exclaimed. I left everything behind, the jewelry, the gifts, everything. Be that as it may, he's a man with influence, the sheriff said with a shrug. His word carries weight with the territorial judge. Hayes stepped forward. Sheriff, you seem like a reasonable man. Surely you can see what's happening here. Miss Kane fled her wedding because she learned Richardson has a history of violence toward women. Now he's using legal threats to force her return. Sheriff Wilson studied Hayes thoughtfully. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, Bethany insisted. His housekeeper showed me the scars from his beatings. My father knew and still expected me to marry him. Even if that's true, I'm just the messenger, the sheriff said, though his expression had softened somewhat. I'm required to relay the information about the potential charges. What you do with that information is your business. Hayes stepped closer to Bethany, his presence reassuring. When do they expect an answer? Richardson's giving her 3 days to return voluntarily, the sheriff replied. After that, he'll swear out a formal complaint. Bethany felt panic rising within her. Even the possibility of legal charges could destroy her chances of building a new life. Who would hire or associate with a woman accused of theft? Hayes must have sensed her distress because he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thank you for delivering the message, Sheriff. We'll need to discuss this privately. Sheriff Wilson nodded. I understand. For what it's worth, I've heard rumors about Richardson myself. Never enough evidence to act on, but enough smoke to make me wonder about fire. He tipped his hat. I'll be heading back to Grand Junction in the morning. If you have a response you'd like me to relay, I'll be at the crossroads in tonight. After the sheriff had disappeared back into the darkness, Bethany sank onto a fallen log, her knees suddenly weak. He'll never let me go, she whispered. Albert will pursue me to the ends of the earth rather than accept the humiliation of being left at the altar. Hayes knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. Listen to me, Bethany. We have options. We can fight these false accusations. I have friends who are lawyers in Denver, or we could leave the territory entirely, start fresh in California or Oregon, and spend our lives looking over our shoulders. Bethany shook her head. I won't condemn you to that kind of existence, Hayes. You love your ranch. It's everything you've worked for. It's just land, Hayes said firmly. You're more important. The simple declaration pierced straight to Bethany's heart. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that Hayes Garrett was unlike any man she had ever known, and that she had fallen irrevocably in love with him. There might be another way, she said slowly, an idea taking shape in her mind. Something that would make Albert's accusations meaningless. Hayes raised a questioning eyebrow. I'm listening. If I were married, Bethany explained, any dispute about property would be between Albert and my husband, not me. And a husband's testimony that I brought no stolen jewelry into the marriage would carry far more weight than Albert's accusations. Understanding dawned in Hayes's eyes. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? A marriage of convenience, Bethany clarified quickly, though her heart ached at reducing what might have been between them to such practical terms. Just on paper to protect me legally. Once Albert gives up his pursuit, we could reconsider. Hayes was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. Then he stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the clearing, his back to her as he stared into the darkness. Hayes, Bethany called, suddenly afraid she had offended him. When he turned back to her, his face was set with determination. No, he said simply. Bethany felt as if she had been struck. No, I won't marry you for convenience, Hayes clarified, walking back to stand before her. If I marry you when I marry you, it will be because we both want it, fully and completely. Not as a legal maneuver or a temporary arrangement. Relief flooded through Bethany, followed quickly by confusion. But then how do we solve this problem with Albert? We fight, Hayes said firmly. Together. I meant what I said before the sheriff interrupted us. I want you in my life, Bethany Kane. Not as a guest or a friend, but as my partner. My wife, if you'll have me. And if that means taking on Albert Richardson and all his money and influence, then that's what we'll do. He knelt before her again, taking her hands in his. I know it's fast. I know you barely know me. But I think you feel what I feel, that somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, we found something true, something worth fighting for. Tears spilled down Bethany's cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I feel it too. Hayes reached up to brush away her tears with a gentle thumb. Then marry me, not for convenience or protection, but because you want to build a life with me. Because you think you could grow to love me as I already love you. I don't need to grow to love you, Hayes Garrett, Bethany confessed, her voice steady despite her tears. I already do. The admission hung between them for a heartbeat. And then Hayes was pulling her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and passion, and a future neither had dared imagine just days before. Bethany melted into his embrace, feeling as if she had finally found her true home. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. We'll send a message with the sheriff tomorrow, he decided. Let Richardson know that Miss Bethany Kane is now Mrs. Hayes Garrett, and any accusations against her will be met with the full force of the law. My friend Judge Hollister in Denver owes me a favor. He'll officiate before Richardson can get his complaint filed. Bethany nodded, then hesitated. But what about your ranch? We'd have to delay our return. The ranch will wait, Hayes assured her. My foreman is capable. Right now, making you legally my wife is more important than anything else. They spent the evening making plans, their earlier tension replaced by a shared purpose and the joy of newfound love. As the fire burned down to embers, Hayes insisted that Bethany take the bedroll while he kept watch. After tomorrow, I promise we'll never sleep apart again, he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. But tonight, I'll honor the propriety my mother drilled into me. Bethany smiled, touched by his old-fashioned gallantry. Your mother raised a gentleman. She tried her best, Hayes agreed with a grin. Now get some rest, Bethany Garrett. We have a wedding to attend tomorrow. The name, her future name, sent a thrill through Bethany as she settled into the bedroll. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, she felt not just safe but genuinely hopeful about what lay ahead. Morning found them riding toward Grand Junction, Hayes leading the way with confident familiarity. They reached the town by midday, a bustling community that served as a supply center for the surrounding ranches and farms. The Crossroads Inn stood at the main intersection, a two-story building with a wide porch and swinging sign. Sheriff Wilson was true to his word, waiting for them in the inn's small dining room. His eyebrows rose in surprise when Hayes laid out their plan. That's one way to handle it, he admitted. Richardson can hardly claim theft against a woman who's legally married to another man. But are you sure about this? Marriage isn't something to rush into. We're sure, Bethany said firmly, her hand finding Hayes's under the table. More sure than I've ever been about anything. The sheriff studied them thoughtfully, then nodded. All right, then. Judge Hollister is actually in town for circuit court. I can arrange for you to see him this afternoon. Events moved swiftly after that. The sheriff introduced them to Judge Hollister, a gruff but fair-minded man who agreed to perform the ceremony after hearing their situation. The innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Paulson, took Bethany under her wing, insisting that a bride needed at least a few special touches for her wedding day. I have a daughter about your size, she said, leading Bethany upstairs to her private quarters. left her good dress behind when she moved to San Francisco last year, and every bride needs something borrowed. The dress was a simple but elegant blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, not traditional wedding white, but far better than the travel-worn clothes Bethany had been wearing for days. Mrs. Paulson also produced a silver hair comb set with small pearls for Bethany to borrow, and helped her arrange her hair in a style more befitting a bride than a fugitive. When Bethany descended the stairs to the small parlor where the ceremony would take place, she found Hayes waiting, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt provided by the innkeeper. The transformation was striking without trail dust and several days' worth of stubble. He looked younger and even more handsome, his gray eyes lighting up when he saw her. Judge Hollister performed a brief but dignified ceremony, with Sheriff Wilson and the Paulsons serving as witnesses. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Hayes's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. After signing the marriage certificate, Sheriff Wilson took charge of sending telegrams, one to Albert Richardson, formally informing him of Bethany's marriage and the legal implications thereof, and another to Hayes's foreman advising of their delayed return. "You two should stay in town tonight," the sheriff suggested. "Give the news time to reach Moab. I have a feeling Richardson will be too proud to pursue this once he knows the marriage is legal and binding." Mrs. Paulson had already prepared the inn's best room for them, complete with fresh flowers and a bottle of her husband's homemade blackberry wine. As evening fell, Bethany found herself alone with Hayes for the first time as his wife, a realization that brought both joy and nervous anticipation. Hayes seemed to sense her mixture of emotions. "We can take our time, Bethany," he said gently, taking her hands in his. "Nothing needs to happen tonight if you're not ready." His consideration only confirmed what Bethany already knew, that she had found a man worthy of her trust and her love. "I am ready," she assured him, stepping closer. "I want to be your wife in every way, Hayes." His eyes darkened with desire, but he held himself in check. "Are you certain? The past week has been a whirlwind. I don't want you to feel rushed or pressured." In answer, Bethany rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, pouring all her newfound certainty into the kiss. Hayes's restraint dissolved as he gathered her close, deepening the kiss with a passion that left them both breathless. That night, they discovered each other with tender exploration and growing passion, learning the language of touch and response that would bind them together as truly as their wedding vows. In Hayes's arms, Bethany found not just pleasure but a profound sense of homecoming, as if her heart had recognized its match long before her mind understood what was happening. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight that streamed through the window, Hayes traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Bethany smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest above his heart. "Only that it took me so long to find you." They remained in Grand Junction for 2 more days, partly to ensure that Richardson had received news of their marriage, and partly to enjoy this brief honeymoon before returning to the responsibilities of the ranch. Sheriff Wilson reported that a terse telegram had arrived from Moab, acknowledging the marriage and withdrawing any potential legal action. "Seems Richardson values his pride more than revenge," the sheriff observed. "Once he knew you were legally married, pursuing the matter would only make him look foolish." With the threat removed, Hayes was eager to show Bethany her new home. They departed Grand Junction with supplies for the journey and gifts from the Paulsons, a handmade quilt, and a set of seed packets for Bethany to start a garden at the ranch. The final day's ride took them through increasingly beautiful country, the landscape opening into a verdant valley cradled by distant mountains. As they crested a ridge in the late afternoon sunshine, Hayes reined in Ranger and gestured to the vista below. "There it is," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Garrett Ranch." Bethany gasped at the sight. The ranch house sat nestled among cottonwood trees beside a clear creek, with outbuildings arranged nearby and cattle grazing in the lush pastures beyond. It was exactly as Hayes had described it, not the largest or most grand, but perfectly situated and obviously well tended. "It's beautiful," she whispered, meaning it with all her heart. "Absolutely beautiful." Hayes's expression was a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "It's not what you're used to, I know. The house is simple. It's perfect," Bethany interrupted firmly. "Because it's yours. Because we'll make it ours together." The tension left Hayes's shoulders, and he smiled that rare, transformative smile that had first captured Bethany's heart. "Let's go home, Mrs. Garrett." They rode down into the valley side by side, toward the future they would build together. The welcome they received at the ranch was warmer than Bethany could have hoped for. Tom Jenkins, Hayes's foreman, had gathered the handful of ranch hands to greet their boss and his unexpected bride. The men were respectful and openly curious, their roughness tempered by genuine good wishes. Mrs. Cooper, the widow who came in 3 times a week to cook and clean for Hayes, had prepared a special supper once word reached her of their arrival. Her initial wariness toward Bethany melted when she saw how Hayes looked at his new wife. "Never thought I'd see the day," she confided to Bethany as they washed dishes together later that evening. "Not since Sarah passed. He's been married to this ranch for so long, we all figured that was how it would stay." "I never expected to find him either," Bethany admitted. "Especially not the way I did," Mrs. Cooper chuckled. "Life has a way of surprising us. My Harold proposed to me during a flash flood with both of us clinging to the same floating log, said if we survived, it was a sign we should get married." Her eyes softened with memory. "We had 30 good years together before he passed." The story touched Bethany deeply, reinforcing her growing belief that sometimes the most unconventional beginnings led to the strongest bonds. That night, alone in the ranch house that was now her home, Bethany and Hayes truly began their life together. The house was indeed simple compared to her father's home in Moab, but it was solidly built and reflected Hayes's practical nature. The main room served as both parlor and dining room, with a kitchen at the back and 2 bedrooms off a short hallway. The furniture was sturdy rather than fashionable, but everything was clean and well maintained. "I thought maybe in the spring we could add on," Hayes said as he showed her around. "Another bedroom, perhaps, and a proper study for you to paint in with good northern light." The casual mention of their future, a future that might include children who would need that extra bedroom, filled Bethany with quiet joy. "I'd like that," she said, slipping her hand into his. "But for now, it's more than enough." In the days and weeks that followed, Bethany settled into ranch life with a determination to make herself useful. She had never been trained in the practical arts of housekeeping. The Kanes had always employed servants for such tasks, but Mrs. Cooper proved a patient teacher. Bethany learned to bake bread, preserve vegetables from the small kitchen garden, and manage the household accounts. Hayes, for his part, took obvious pleasure in introducing Bethany to every aspect of the ranch. He taught her to ride Western style, more practical than the side saddle she had used in Moab. He showed her how to recognize the Garrett brand on their cattle and explained the rhythm of the ranching year: calving in spring, branding in early summer, the fall roundup, and drive to market. Their evenings were their own, filled with quiet companionship and growing passion. Hayes proved as attentive and considerate a husband as Bethany could have wished for, never taking her for granted or attempting to control her activities. When she expressed interest in visiting the small town of Cedar Ridge, 10 miles from the ranch, he arranged for Tom Jenkins to escort her rather than insisting she wait until he could accompany her himself. "You're not a prisoner here," he said when she thanked him for his understanding. "I meant what I said about your freedom, Bethany. I want you happy, not caged." In Cedar Ridge, Bethany gradually made acquaintances that developed into friendships. The minister's wife, Emma Benson, invited her to join the ladies' sewing circle, where she was welcomed without the probing questions about her hasty marriage that she had feared. The town's small general store began stocking painting supplies at her request, and Hayes built her an easel for her birthday in September. Summer turned to fall, and as the aspen trees in the hills turned golden, Bethany realized she had been at Garrett Ranch for 3 months, the happiest months of her adult life. She had received one letter from her father, stiffly formal and clearly written at the urging of Moab's minister, offering reconciliation if she and her new husband would visit. Hayes left the decision entirely to her, and after careful consideration, Bethany wrote back declining the invitation but expressing hope that time would heal the breach. Their first Christmas as a married couple brought a heavy snowfall that isolated the ranch for nearly a week. Far from feeling confined, Bethany reveled in the cozy intimacy of the ranch house, with its blazing fire and pine boughs she had arranged along the mantel. Hayes presented her with a set of fine watercolors ordered months earlier from Denver, while Bethany gave him a portrait she had painted of Ranger, his faithful stallion. That winter also brought news that filled them both with nervous excitement. Bethany was expecting a child, due in late summer. Hayes's reaction upon hearing the news was everything Bethany could have hoped for. After a moment of stunned silence, he had lifted her in a gentle embrace, his eyes suspiciously bright. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Bethany asked, suddenly uncertain. They had discussed children in an abstract way but had never specifically planned for this pregnancy. Hayes set her down carefully, cupping her face in his hands. "Please doesn't begin to cover it, Bethany. I'm overwhelmed, terrified, overjoyed." He laughed shakily. "All of it at once." His honest vulnerability touched her deeply. "Me too," she admitted. "I know nothing about being a mother." "And I know nothing about being a father," Hayes agreed. "But we'll learn together just like we've learned everything else." Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, flowers in Bethany's expanded garden, and the visible evidence of her pregnancy. Hayes hovered anxiously as her condition advanced, insisting on hiring a young woman from Cedar Ridge to help with household tasks when Bethany's energy flagged. "You're not to exhaust yourself," he declared when she protested that she could manage. "Dr. Wilson was very clear about that." Bethany acquiesced with good grace, recognizing that Hayes's protectiveness stemmed from love rather than a desire to control. Besides, as the summer heat intensified and her body grew increasingly unwieldy, she was secretly grateful for the help. Their son, William Thomas Garrett, arrived on a sweltering August evening in 1879, after a labor that tested Bethany's endurance to its limits. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, the pain was instantly forgotten in the wonder of meeting the perfect little person she and Hayes had created. Hayes, who had been banished to the porch during the delivery, entered the bedroom with cautious reverence when the midwife finally invited him in. The sight of his strong, capable husband, rendered speechless by the tiny bundle in Bethany's arms, was a memory she knew she would cherish forever. "He's so small," Hayes whispered, gently touching their son's downy head. "But strong," Bethany assured him. "Just like his father." Hayes sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. "He has your nose, I think, and maybe your chin." "Poor child," Bethany teased, though she was deeply touched by Hayes's attempt to find her features in their son. "Don't say that," Hayes said seriously. "If he grows up to be half as beautiful as you, he'll be a handsome man indeed." He leaned in to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you, Bethany, for our son, for everything." The birth announcement published in the Cedar Ridge Chronicle a week later reads simply, "Hayes and Bethany Garrett joyfully announce the arrival of William Thomas Garrett, 7 pounds 6 ounces, August 15, 1879. Mother and child doing well." What the announcement couldn't capture was the profound shift that had occurred in their lives, the way the ranch house, already a home, had become something more sacred with the addition of their child. Or how Hayes, despite his initial nervousness, took to fatherhood with natural ease, often carrying William in a sling while he performed his less strenuous ranch duties. By William's first birthday, Bethany was pregnant again, this time with considerably less anxiety and more joyful anticipation. Their daughter, Grace Sarah Garrett, joined the family in March 1881, a placid baby with her father's gray eyes who rarely cried and watched the world with solemn curiosity. Life at Garrett Ranch settled into a rhythm marked by the seasons and the children's milestones. The ranch prospered under Hayes's careful management, allowing them to hire additional hands and expand their operation. Bethany's paintings, initially created just for pleasure, began to sell to visitors from Denver, and even as far away as San Francisco, who heard about the talented Mrs. Garrett of Cedar Ridge. In the spring of 1883, nearly 5 years after Bethany had fled her wedding in Moab, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Hayes was working with the hands in the north pasture when Tom Jenkins rode in to inform him that Albert Richardson was waiting at the house. Hayes rode back immediately, concern for Bethany overriding his curiosity about what could have brought Richardson to their door after all this time. He found them in the parlor, Bethany sitting straight-backed in her chair, her expression carefully neutral, while Richardson stood awkwardly by the fireplace, hat in hand. The children were nowhere to be seen, presumably sent outside with their young nursemaid for this difficult encounter. "Mr. Richardson," Hayes said evenly, removing his hat as he entered. "This is unexpected." Albert Richardson had aged in the years since Bethany had last seen him. His hair was graying at the temples, and lines had deepened around his mouth and eyes. He looked prosperous but somehow diminished, lacking the arrogant confidence Bethany remembered. "Mr. Garrett," Richardson acknowledged with a nod. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was passing through on business and thought I should. That is, I felt I owed Mrs. Garrett an explanation." "And an apology." Hayes glanced at Bethany, who gave him a slight nod indicating she was comfortable continuing the conversation. He moved to stand beside her chair, a silent show of support. "I'm listening," Bethany said quietly. Richardson cleared his throat. "What happened in Moab?" "The way I behaved toward you and others, it was inexcusable. I won't insult you by offering justifications. I was wrong." He looked directly at Bethany for the first time. "After you left, there was considerable gossip. Your father tried to save face by claiming you were unwell, mentally unstable even. But the housekeeper, Martha," she spoke up, "told people what I had done." "That must have been difficult for her," Bethany observed, remembering the woman's courage in warning her before the wedding. "It was," Richardson agreed. "I fired her, of course, but by then others had come forward with similar stories. The damage to my reputation was significant." "I'm not sorry to hear it," Hayes said bluntly. Richardson nodded in acknowledgement. "Nor should you be." It forced me to confront truths about myself I had long avoided. I left Moab, spent some time in a sanatorium in Denver. The doctors there helped me understand that my behavior stemmed from wounds inflicted in my own childhood. He straightened his shoulders. That's not an excuse, just context. The important thing is that I've spent these years trying to make amends where possible. Martha now serves as housekeeper in my Denver home, with fair wages and the respect she deserves. I've contributed anonymously to organizations that help women in difficult circumstances. Why tell us this now? Bethany asked. Because I owe you a debt I can never repay, Richardson said simply. Your courage in leaving forced me to change, and I wanted you to know that your actions that day may have saved other women from suffering at my hands. A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Bethany spoke. Thank you for coming, Albert. I won't pretend what you did didn't cause pain, but I'm glad to hear you've sought help and made changes. I have, he assured her, and I want you to know that I wish you both nothing but happiness. He glanced around the comfortable room with its evidence of family life: William's wooden horse on the floor, Grace's tiny shoes by the door, Bethany's paintings on the walls. It appears you found it. We have, Hayes confirmed, resting a hand on Bethany's shoulder. Richardson nodded, seeming genuinely relieved. Then my conscience can rest a little easier. He reached for his hat. I won't intrude any longer. As Hayes showed him to the door, Richardson paused on the threshold. One more thing, Mrs. Garrett. Your father is unwell. His heart, the doctors say. He may not have much time left. He's too proud to reach out himself, but I know he thinks of you. After Richardson had departed, Bethany sat quietly, processing all she had heard. Hayes knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Are you all right? He asked gently. Bethany nodded slowly. I think so. It was unexpected, but not unwelcome, strangely enough, to know that something good came from that day. A great deal of good came from that day, Hayes reminded her, squeezing her hands. It brought you to me. Bethany smiled, the memories of their extraordinary journey together flooding through her. The best decision I ever made was running from that church. And the best decision I ever made was offering you my horse, Hayes replied with an answering smile. And eventually my heart. What do you think I should do about my father? Bethany asked after a moment. Hayes considered the question carefully. That's for you to decide, Bethany, but I know you have a compassionate heart, and regret is a heavy burden to carry. 2 weeks later, they made the journey to Moab, with the children and a small trunk packed with clothes suitable for an extended stay. Bethany's father, Edward Kane, had aged dramatically since she had last seen him. The once imposing man was now frail and shrunken, his imperious manner softened by illness and, perhaps, regret. The reconciliation was not immediate or complete. There were difficult conversations, old wounds reopened before they could properly heal. But there was also forgiveness, offered and received on both sides. Edward Kane met his grandchildren for the first time, his stern face softening as William solemnly shook his hand, and Grace climbed trustingly into his lap. They stayed in Moab for a month, long enough for Edward to set his affairs in order and amend his will to include Bethany and her children. When they departed, it was with a promise to visit again in the spring, a promise they were unable to keep, as Edward passed away peacefully in his sleep that winter. The loss brought Bethany a complex mixture of grief and acceptance. Hayes supported her through it all, his steady presence a reminder that while the past had shaped them both, it was their shared future that defined them now. That future continued to unfold in ways neither could have predicted on that fateful day when Bethany fled her wedding, and Hayes offered her escape. The ranch expanded as their family grew to include a third child, James Edward, born in 1884. Bethany's paintings gained recognition beyond Colorado, with several pieces exhibited in galleries in Denver and San Francisco. Hayes served 2 terms as county commissioner, respected for his fair-mindedness and integrity. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, they remained each other's truest companions and most passionate advocates. Their children grew up surrounded by evidence of their parents' deep bond, learning by example that love at its best was both liberating and sustaining. On the evening of their 20th anniversary in 1898, Hayes and Bethany sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and rose. William, now 19, was studying law in Denver. Grace, 17, was inside practicing the piano for the next day's church service. James, 14, was in the barn tending to a new foal with all the seriousness his father had once shown for ranch responsibilities. "You ever regret it?" Hayes asked suddenly, his voice thoughtful in the gathering twilight. "Running away that day, all you left behind?" Bethany turned to study the face she had loved for 2 decades, now older, lined by weather and responsibility, but still handsome to her eyes, still capable of making her heart beat faster with a certain look or touch. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "Everything I truly needed was ahead of me, not behind." Hayes smiled, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm in a gesture that had become habitual over the years, yet never lost its power to move her. "When I offered you my horse that day, I had no idea I was offering my heart as well." "I think perhaps you did," Bethany countered gently. "Even then, some part of you knew." "Perhaps," Hayes acknowledged. "All I know for certain is that helping a desperate bride escape her wedding was the best decision I ever made." Bethany leaned against his shoulder, content in the life they had built together. "And accepting that help was mine." As night fell over Garrett Ranch, stars emerging like scattered diamonds in the vast Colorado sky, Bethany Kane Garrett reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here from a tearful flight in a wedding dress to this moment of profound contentment. A journey that began with a desperate escape had become a lifelong adventure in love, proving that sometimes the bravest choice a person could make was to flee from what others expected and run toward what the heart truly desired.